The truck came through my east pasture gate at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, headlights off, moving slow across the grass like it was trying not to be noticed. I was sitting on my back porch with a coffee I'd made an hour earlier and forgotten to drink, watching the ridgeline the way I do most nights before I go in, and when I saw the twin shapes of unlit headlights cutting through the dark near my fence line, I didn't reach for my phone first. I reached for my boots. By the time I got the second one laced and crossed the yard to the pasture gate, the truck had looped around the back of the small equipment shed I keep near the creek and was already heading back toward the road, moving faster now, its taillights briefly visible as it turned onto the county road without ever stopping, without turning its lights on fully until it was almost at the tree line. I stood at the gate for a long moment, looking at the tire tracks pressed into the soft ground near the creek bank, and what I felt wasn't fear exactly. It was the particular, settled kind of anger that comes when you realize something's been happening longer than you noticed, and that whoever's been doing it has been counting on you not to notice. That truck had been through my property before. It would come through twice more before I finished what I'm about to tell you. And 6 weeks after that first night, I saw it with my own eyes. 8 steel bollards were going to go into the ground across every vehicle access point on my ranch in a single overnight installation. And the man who'd been sending that truck was going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with a county sheriff's deputy, a state attorney, and his own HOA board, all in the same week. My name is Travis Holbrook. I'm 44 years old. I run a cattle and hay operation on about 380 acres in Caldwell County, a place my family has worked since my grandfather bought the original parcel in 1961, and my father expanded it twice over, once in the 80s and once in the 90s. The land is mine outright now, no mortgage, no partner, no dispute about ownership that I'm aware of, and hasn't been since my mother passed and left it to me 9 years ago. The ranch sits at the edge of a county road on 3 sides, with a creek running along the 4th, and the nearest subdivision is about 1.5 miles east, a development called Meadowvale Estates that went up about 12 years ago when the county was in a growth phase, and a developer named Garrett Sims bought a large parcel from an old farming family that wanted out and put 240 houses on it. Meadowvale Estates has an HOA. Every house in it is a member. The HOA has a board, as these things do, and for the past 7 years that board has been run, in every meaningful sense, by a man named Philip Craddock, the kind of person who takes a volunteer position with a homeowners association and treats it with the energy and seriousness most people reserve for actual positions of authority, because in Philip Craddock's mind, it was one. He was a former commercial insurance broker who'd retired early on what appeared to be a comfortable amount of money and had immediately redirected all the organizational drive that had presumably made him successful into the HOA, its committees, its rules, its enforcement mechanisms, and most significantly, its long-term development vision, a phrase I'm using loosely to describe Philip's personal ambition for Meadowvale Estates to eventually expand. I first heard Philip Craddock's name about 2.5 years before the truck started coming through my gate, when my neighbor Delia Ochoa, who runs a small horse boarding operation about 1/4 mile from my eastern fence line, mentioned him over the fence one afternoon with the particular tone people use when they want to warn you about something without saying outright that they're warning you. The HOA over at Meadowvale's been real active lately, Delia said, clipping her words the way she does when she's being careful. Philip Craddock's been talking to people out this way about selling, not pushy yet, just talking. But you know how talking goes when somebody really wants something. I knew how talking went. I told Delia thanks and filed it away. I'd ask her about it again a few months later when I first started noticing strange things along my fence lines, and she told me, without much surprise, that Craddock had approached the family that used to own the Hendricks parcel 3 miles west of me about 8 years back, and spent the better part of a year in polite conversation before that situation turned into something else entirely, a zoning dispute, a complaint to the county about an old barn structure on the property. And then a very fast sale once the family had decided the whole thing had gotten more aggravating than the land was worth to keep. She didn't say Craddock had engineered the situation directly. She just described what had happened in the sequential way of someone who'd watched it unfold and drawn her own conclusions. About 3 months after Delia's initial warning, Philip Craddock showed up at my front gate in person, alone, in a silver SUV with a small Meadowvale Estates HOA placard on the dash that I suspected he'd put there himself rather than it being any kind of official county-issued identification. He was a trim, put-together man in his late 50s, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt in the particular way that says he'd thought about what to wear for this conversation, and he introduced himself with the easy, practiced confidence of someone who'd done a lot of first meetings in his life and generally expected them to go his way. He made me an offer on the ranch. It was below market. Not insultingly so, not the kind of lowball that tells you the other person thinks you're desperate or stupid, but below what the land was worth to me in a way that assumed I might be open to a straightforward transaction that got him what he wanted without making it feel like a negotiation. I told him I wasn't interested in selling. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer he'd expected, said he understood, left a business card, and drove off in the silver SUV. That would have been the end of it with most people. It wasn't the end of it with Philip Craddock. Over the following 8 months, he came back 4 more times, each visit slightly different in approach but identical in destination. The second time he brought an associate, a younger man who turned out to be a commercial real estate broker, and together they presented what Philip called a development opportunity analysis for my land, a glossy printed booklet showing what Meadowvale Estates could look like with an additional 160 homes built on a portion of my acreage. Complete with a rendering of a new neighborhood entrance sign and a green space corridor that featured a creek access point that happened to run directly through my property. The offer in the booklet was higher than the first one but still not market rate, and it was structured so that the bulk of it was contingent on various approvals and phase completions that, from what I could tell, were essentially me taking on the risk of a development process, while Philip Craddock and his associates got the upside. I said no, again. The third visit was Philip alone, and he was more direct this time, less glossy booklet, more conversation, asking me what it would take, what I was looking for, whether there was a number that made sense. I told him there wasn't a number because I wasn't selling. I'd raised cattle on this land, my father had raised cattle on this land, and I intended to keep doing it. He looked at me for a long moment, with the particular expression of a man reclassifying someone from potential seller to obstacle, and then he smiled, thanked me for my time, and left. The fourth and fifth visits, I didn't answer the gate. I'd seen the silver SUV turning off the county road from my kitchen window both times and simply didn't go out, which I knew was a passive response that probably suited Philip Craddock's patience better than it suited mine. But I also knew that any conversation I had with him at that point was going to be a conversation I didn't need to have. Somewhere between the fifth visit and the Tuesday night, I saw the unlit truck. Something shifted in Philip Craddock's approach because he stopped coming himself. The tire tracks near the creek were the first real evidence of what that shift looked like. I'd noticed unusual tracks twice before, once along the south fence line near the road and once across the edge of the North Hay field, but both times I'd chalked it up to county road maintenance vehicles or utility truck overruns, the kind of thing that happens occasionally on rural land along a public road. After seeing the truck with my own eyes, I went back and looked at those earlier tracks more carefully, and what I saw made the casual explanation theory a lot harder to hold on to. They were the same tire width, same tread pattern, wide and aggressive, the kind you see on heavy-duty work trucks or large SUVs. And in the North Hay field, where the ground had been soft after a week of rain, the tracks had gone almost 100 yards into the field before looping back out, far deeper into my property than any road maintenance vehicle would have had any reason to go. I called my county sheriff's deputy, a level-headed man named Deputy Wes Calloway, who'd worked the rural patrol route out our way for 11 years, and who I'd dealt with a few times over the years on things like livestock on the road and a fence dispute with a previous neighbor. I told him what I'd seen, described the truck as best I could, a full-size dark-colored pickup or large SUV, no visible markings, running dark, and showed him the tire track photos I'd taken that morning. Weez looked at the photos, walked the tracks himself, and was quiet for a moment in the way he had of thinking before he said anything. "You got any cameras on that east gate?" he asked. "I didn't, not yet." "Get some," he said, which was the kind of advice that was simultaneously useful, obvious, and slightly late. He told me he'd run a patrol along the county road on nights he could work it in, and that if I could get footage of the vehicle, I should call him immediately, but that without a license plate or clear identification, there wasn't a lot of formal action he could take on what was currently just a trespass by tire tracks situation. I ordered cameras that same afternoon. 4 of them, outdoor-rated, motion-activated, with night vision, positioned to cover the east gate, the south access point off the county road, the north field approach, and the equipment shed near the creek where the truck had looped. I had them mounted and running within 3 days, and then I waited. The truck came back 11 days after I installed the cameras, on a Thursday around 2 in the morning, and this time I got it on video. The footage wasn't perfect. The truck moved slowly with its lights mostly off, and the angle wasn't ideal for plate capture, but it was clear enough to establish 2 things with certainty. It was a large, dark-colored SUV, and on its front bumper, partially obscured by mud that looked like it might have been applied deliberately, was something that caught the camera's motion-activated flood for about 4 frames before the vehicle turned away, a yellow and black emblem of some kind, the specific design of which I couldn't make out fully, but which Delia Ochoa, when I showed her the stilled frames the next morning, identified immediately. "That's the Meadowvale HOA logo," she said. "I've seen it on signs at their entrance. That little diamond shape with the M is theirs." I stood there looking at a still frame of a truck with a Meadowvale Estates HOA emblem on its bumper, running dark across my pasture at 2 in the morning, and the anger I'd felt 11 days earlier at the gate came back, colder and more specific this time. This wasn't a random trespass. This was organized, repeated, deliberate, and tied directly to the organization whose president had been trying to buy my land for the better part of 2 years. I called Weez Calloway. I emailed him the footage clips. He watched them the same day and called me back within the hour. "That's significant," he said, in the measured way law enforcement tends to present things before they commit to what they're actually thinking. "I can't confirm from this footage alone that the vehicle is owned by or operated by the HOA specifically, but the emblem's there, and I can run it up the chain and see if there are any registered HOA vehicles I can cross-reference. In the meantime, Travis, you've got clear grounds for a trespass complaint now. You want to file it formal." I said yes. The formal trespass complaint went in that Friday, naming the Meadowvale Estates HOA as a likely party of interest based on the visual evidence, and a copy was forwarded by Weez's office to the county sheriff's main office for the investigative side. I also did something else that day. I called my attorney, a no-nonsense property and civil rights lawyer named Lorna Vasquez, who'd done work for several ranching families in our county over the years, and who, when I described everything, from Craddock's repeated purchase attempts to the nighttime intrusions to the HOA-logoed vehicle, went very quiet on the other end of the line before saying, "Travis, I need you to preserve every piece of that footage and every record of every interaction you've had with Philip Craddock since his first visit. Don't delete anything. Don't share anything beyond law enforcement. Can you do that?" I said I could. Good, because what you're describing, if it connects the way I think it connects, isn't just trespass. It's a pattern of conduct that may constitute harassment and intimidation in the context of a property transaction, which in this state carries its own statute and its own teeth. What I need is documentation that ties the vehicle access to Craddock or to anyone acting on his direction. The third intrusion happened 9 days after the formal complaint was filed, and this time I was ready for it in a way I hadn't been before. I'd set up a phone alert on the camera system so any motion event on the east gate or the south access point would wake me up immediately, and at 1:23 in the morning on a Wednesday, my phone lit up with a motion alert from the east gate camera. I was out of bed and on the phone to Weez within 60 seconds. "They're on my property right now," I told him. "East Gate just came through." We's had a patrol car in the area and had been, I think, half expecting exactly this, because he was on the county road at the east fence line in under 12 minutes, which is fast for rural response time. The SUV, caught between the deputy's lights at the gate and the awareness, apparently sudden, that it had been seen coming in, chose to exit the way it came rather than try to push through to the county road from a different direction. And it was Wees himself who got the plate as it came back through the gate, moving faster than it had any business moving on soft pasture ground. The plate came back registered to a vehicle owned by a private security contractor named Cross County Patrol Services, LLC, a small company that, when Wees' office pulled its business registration the following morning, listed as its primary client Meadowvale Estates HOA, contract renewed annually, current contract covering property monitoring and access patrol services for the subdivision and, according to a services addendum, Wees was able to obtain through the County Business Records Office, adjacent area reconnaissance as directed by client. Adjacent area reconnaissance. I want you to sit with those 3 words for a second, because I did, standing in Lorna's office the afternoon she called me with what Wees had found. Adjacent area reconnaissance, on a contract paid for by Meadowvale Estates HOA, whose president had made 5 separate purchase attempts on my property, the last of which I declined without ambiguity and had then stopped coming personally. The reconnaissance had apparently continued on his behalf by other means, specifically by a licensed private security company he was paying to drive through my land in the dark, using a vehicle with HOA markings, creating what I could only assume was meant to look, to anyone who spotted them, like some kind of official patrol presence in the area. Lorna let me read that services addendum twice before she said anything. Then she said, in the flat, precise voice she used when she was already building something in her head, "He's using HOA resources to fund coercive pressure against a private landowner who refused to sell to an HOA-adjacent development project. That is not an HOA governance activity. That is personal use of association funds for private purposes, and depending on how the contract approval process worked within his board, it may also be a breach of fiduciary duty to the members who pay those dues." "And the trespass?" I asked. "The trespass is the most immediately actionable piece, and that's where the criminal side lies. But the fiduciary issue is what's going to matter to 240 households who've been paying HOA dues to fund someone's personal real estate pressure campaign." She paused. "I'd like you to hold off on confronting Craddock directly for now. Let me put together what we have, and let Wees finish his side of it. When this moves, I want it to move on all fronts at once." I agreed to hold off. It wasn't easy, I want to be honest about that, because the image of that truck running dark across my pasture while I sat on my porch not knowing what it was, and the realization of how long it had probably been happening before I'd seen it with my own eyes, was not a thing I could think about without feeling something in me pull toward a very direct response. But Lorna was right. A direct confrontation with Philip Craddock gave him time to shape a narrative. Evidence, filed complaints, and a coordinated legal and law enforcement approach did not. What I did instead, while Lorna built her case and Wees continued his investigation, was solve the immediate problem in the most direct way I knew how. Because whatever was coming legally, I still had 380 acres of working ranch that someone had been driving through in the dark for who knew how long, and I was not going to spend another night wondering whether tonight was going to be the night they came back. I called a fencing and site contractor named Ray Delgado, a man I'd worked with before on a cattle guard installation on the South Road access, and told him I needed 8 steel bollards installed across every vehicle entry point on my property. Not the decorative kind. The kind used to stop vehicle access at government buildings and high-security facilities. Steel pipe, concrete anchored, 4 feet high, spaced at standard vehicle width intervals, powder-coated black. I told him I needed it done in a single overnight installation across all 8 points simultaneously, because I didn't want to leave any access open while work was in progress at another. I asked what it would take to make that happen. Ray was quiet for a moment running whatever math contractors run when someone gives them a scope they didn't expect. I can do it, he said. I'll need 4 crews and 2 concrete trucks. You're looking at a long night. That's fine, I said. And it ain't cheap on an overnight schedule with that many crews.